So this is from Might of the Thoughts. It's chapter 16. I have the third edition, which was published in 2020, and it's pages 228 to 232. Um, but I've heard in other books it starts on 238 instead, so it might depend on which book you have. Optimism is a prerequisite for the constancy in life. If the human being is capable of dealing with the often very hard facts, situations, and circumstances and so forth of his or her existence in a creative and constructive, kind, and wise, and not thereby losing his or her conviction about a good end, then he/she can rightly claim that he/she has achieved a good optimism. Therefore, he/she is a real optimist, which he/she, however, first had to become as a result of the work of his or her thoughts, as a result of thoughts which have matured, as the human being tends to say, when they are constructive, creative and constructive, and bring good values and successes in manifold form. Crafty, meanwhile, does not mean that the human being for whom crafty thoughts are typical knows all the dirty tricks, which is the context in which the term is mostly used. Rather, that the craftiness consists of the operation of right, healthy, progressive, and positive thoughts, and the use of their might in all matters of one's own development, with which the achievement of a healthy optimism also belongs. Also included in this form of good, healthy, and positive craftiness are perseverance and firmness, as well as persistence and necessary flexibility, which are of immense significance for progress and self realization. Becoming an optimist depends on the kind of the philosophy of life one has, and with that, on following those creational natural laws and recommendations which determine the striving for that which is higher. Therefore, it is necessary that one creates the corresponding attitude of the consciousness and the corresponding direction of the thoughts, which constitute the basic prerequisite for a conscious striving for that which is higher. Once perseverance and firmness, as well as persistence and the necessary imaginations, intentions, wishes, and efforts are also added, then a mixture of values and powers arises, which no longer allows any disappointment. And once, as a result of that, the human being has become a strong, tough spirit, then it is easy for him or her to bear even the greatest strains and challenges without suffering some sort of harm from them, or indeed being shattered by them. But for that, one requires the real optimism, which fulfills an extraordinarily important function in the human being's life and is responsible for the fact that every thought and every feeling, as well as every act and deed, is progressively tended, nurtured, handled, and carried out in a neutral, positive, equalized form. But if there is no optimism and if it is not created, then no progress can be achieved because the thoughts are inevitably weak and in their powerless they collapse, which has the further effect that purely physical weakness also appears. Admittedly, perseverance, persistence, and firmness alone are not enough because one's better half, in favor of which the human being should decide in good cheer with a conscious will and in necessary knowledge, lies deep in the innermost realm of his or her spiritual existence and requires quite special attention, love, and care. This better half is the innermost nature of the spirit, that is to say, of the spirit form, in accordance with which the human being also has to assiduously and evolutively form his or her inner nature. That is the nature of his or her own personality, and he himself or she herself determines and forms it according to his or her own will, which is why it can be fundamentally different to the real innermost spiritual nature. But just as the innermost nature of the spirit form and the inner nature of the consciousness of the personality exists, there is also the external nature, which, as the value of the word says, is expressed outwardly in the environment, whereby this external nature in turn does not have to be in harmony with the inner nature of the consciousness. The human being is extremely oh, the human being is an extremely gifted actor. Consequently, it is easy it is an easy thing for him or her to present him or herself in a deceptive, kind, and wise differently on the outside to the way he or she is in his or her inner consciousness-based nature, that is to say, personal nature. And there can be an utter discrepancy between how he or she is in turn in this nature and the actual innermost creational nature of the spirit form, that is to say, of the spirit. It therefore follows from that these aspects must also be thoroughly considered in order to give them the necessary attention and to form the consciousness personality based inner nature accordingly, after which it also then must be expressed outwardly by means of the outer nature. Therefore, one's entire life must be tackled and be caused to evolve to higher values, which means, however, that many hurdles, very many hurdles, must be overcome, errors made and resolved, and successes and victories achieved, because a forward progress only thereby comes about. And precisely that is the reason why, along with endurance, firmness, and persistence, a healthy optimism is also needed. But precisely this term is a word which is unfortunately often wrongly understood and is related to human behavior for which no justification may be found. Optimism, in connection with this explanation, does not mean behavior which is, for example, typical of a harlequin or one who fools about, or of an extremely jolly person or a Pollyanna, a carefree person, one bursting with hope, one bursting with confidence, or an enthusiast, and so forth. In fact, that which is meant is that kind of optimistic behavior which enables a human being to see and acknowledge the clear truth, and even in the rottenest situation, to realistically observe and consider the very worst, and nonetheless recognize the best and direct his or her striving at that in order to allow the good and evolutive things to become reality, and in order also for him or her to make them real, him or herself. Thus, an optimist is therefore no clown or other comical figure. Rather, he or she is a human being who, under the greatest pressure, remains consciously hopeful and happy, and in defiance of all blows, breakdowns, and deplorable states of affairs, and so forth, always retains the upper hand and the sense and the conviction for that which is good and that which is the best. Furthermore, optimism represents a quality which fascinates all human beings and which every single human being would certainly like to call his or her own. And the human being for whom optimism is characteristic has, under the most unusual circumstances and situations, the power to not only form his or her life correctly, rather also to enchant it, and to not just allow it to appear better than it is, rather to also allow it to become better than before. Just the presence of a positive human being is a joy and a pleasure. Indeed, it is a blessing for those others who have contact with him or her, and indeed, in particular, when the positive human being is additionally a pronounced optimist in his or her inner nature and outer nature. Does that not rouse every human being to become such an optimist? So, one quote that I thought summed it up really nicely was this one. In fact, that which is meant is that kind of optimistic behavior which enables a human being to see and acknowledge the clear truth, and even in the rottenest situation, to realistically observe and consider the very worst, and nonetheless recognize the best, and direct his or her striving at that in order to allow the good and evolutive things to become reality, and in order also for him or her to make them real, him or herself. So I thought this was just very interesting because we tend to see, we tend to use optimism as a slight against people. They have their head up in the clouds, but this clearly says, like, no, you understand the good and the bad, the unbalanced, the balanced, and you use your thoughts and you form your innermost nature so that you can see those things in reality, but also strive for something that's better. Um, so that really stuck out to me. But I'm curious what you all think about it, and I will stop sharing. Thank you.